At this time, I'd like to call the October the 10th, 2019 meeting of the Plaquemines Parish Council Audit Committee to order, and the machine is open for roll call. Let the record reflect that all members are present. Mr. Duke is here representing the department. At this time, we'd like to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Schultz, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, at this time, we'll move to item 2A.
Discussion of the scope of the Volunteer Fire Department's internal audit.
Mr. Duke? Mr. Duke, make sure you're talking to the mic.
Yes, it's, okay. What I'd like to do with this topic is recommend that instead of auditing the 7 volunteer fire departments' books and records, that we audit the fire departments that have received public funding.
And that's, you might want to elaborate, that's a little...
The only one so far that I can attest to that is the Point Allahash Volunteer Fire Department.
Right, but I mean, you might want to elaborate on the fact that how we came to this decision after some investigation, discussion with the legislative auditor, and a bunch of other things.
Well, yeah, I guess there is a lot that goes into this, but I did speak with the LLA, gentleman by the name of Mr. Cryer, and he stated that the best way, if we wanted to audit the records of these fire departments that is not public funding, such as the member dues, donations, and fundraising, the council would have to pass an ordinance to do that. That'd be the best way to do it. Otherwise, you'd have to subpoena the records. You know, after taking a look at it, I have a couple of reservations with it. But Mr. Cryer doesn't think it's something that we should really look into because of the amount of money involved. So the amount of time spent. However, I kind of disagree with that from the viewpoint that we are paying some of their operating expenses, and the fact that even though some of this fundraising, some of this revenue could be, there's a possibility that could be spent on something that is not good. And if somebody from the outside comes in and takes a look at it, that is a risk to Plaquemines Parish. So I do have a reservation that if that were to happen, you know, Plaquemines Parish could look bad, but that risk seems to be very low to me, you know, from the different folks that I've spoken to about their revenues, although I can't really tell you one way or the other. I mean, if you go in there, and if I go in there, it may be better to go in there and take a look at it and come back to the committee and say, hey, look, I'm positive that this money is being spent the correct way. I can't do that for you guys right now. So that being said, I guess that's something that we have to, you know, vote on, you know, take a look at. All 4 of us need to decide, I guess, this morning whether we want to go into that direction or not. There again, I guess my main concern is that we're paying some of their operating expenses, which I would think should give me the right to look at their revenue. But the fire department chiefs that I've spoken to don't agree with that. So that being said, you know, it's really up to the committee, you know, for a vote. Do we want to do an ordinance to go ahead and audit all 7 volunteer fire departments? Or do we want to just stick with the one volunteer fire department that we know we have the authority to audit, which is the Point Allahash Fire Department? And, I mean, we know we have to audit that because of, you know, certain monies that have been transferred from PPG to their bank account. So I can just tell the committee that there is a risk out there that, the other monies that are not public funds for these fire departments could, as a possibility, could be being spent on something that they shouldn't be being spent on. But that's just a guess on my part, having not looked at the books.
Okay. So to sum this up is that you've reached out to the volunteer fire departments. The chiefs have refused to allow you to audit the books. The public funds that have been given to fire department will be audited, and that came down to one department.
That's correct.
And so to sum this up, in my opinion, is that the volunteers, on their fundraising efforts, do have to file an affidavit with the state. Is that correct?
Well, Mr. Cryer is looking into that because he told me the other day that I spoke to him that he's not certain of that. When he looked back on the records and saw that nobody's submitting these reports, he's under the impression now that maybe they are not, maybe they do not have to file those with his department. He's looking into it. I haven't heard back from him yet, though.
Okay. So as it stands now, you're going to schedule the fire department that has received public funds and move forward with that?
That's correct. I have sent several emails to the fire chief at Point Allahash, and I have not received a response to date.
Okay. This will be my last comment. I would have thought that the volunteer fire departments were willing to open their books.
I would think that
But
they...
I don't understand the resistance.
I don't either.
And I guess we may learn that in a future date, but it's just kind of strange to me why that.
I don't understand that either, but it's just the way it is. For some reason, they just don't think that we have the authority to audit their fundraising, donations, and other revenue. That has nothing to do with public funds. And, when I spoke with Mr. Cryer, he had the same thoughts. He says, well, Randy, I'm not really sure if you have the authority to do it. Just go in and do it. And he said the cleanest way to do it would be to ask the council to pass an ordinance mandating that I have the right to go in and look at their revenue. Now, there's no doubt in my mind we have the right to look at their operating expenses because we pay some of their operating expenses.
None of them wanted to open their books, do you?
No, none of them want to do it so far, sir. No, but I mean, if you look at their, according to Mr. Butcher, most of the paid fire expenses and revenue goes through PPG's books, and some of the expenses are paid by PPG. So when I look at the paid side of it, I'll see some of those expenses, but the other expenses will be hidden from me.
But Mr. Butcher is the paid superintendent, which
he's the man in charge of the paid side.
Right. So that's different than the volunteer side, correct?
Yes, that is correct. But what you have here is, it seems to me, is a situation where the volunteer fire departments and the paid side are commingled together because of the operating expenses.
Well, the way I see the way the fire departments operate, we have a couple of paid employees, and the people who come in and fight the fires are the volunteers with those 2 or 3 paid employees. So
Right.
I always kind of view them as working together. And I assume they have to work together because if not, we wouldn't have anybody to put out the fires.
Right. Well, I haven't gotten that in depth with it just yet, so I can't really attest to that. But, it seems to me that they would want us to take a look at the revenue side just to be able to report to everybody that everything is being paid correctly. And that there's most of those expenses are probably being paid for, I don't know, certain maybe groceries and things of that nature to support them, the volunteer fire department. But there is a chance that maybe some of those expenses could be far out, and a lot of people that make donations would not want those monies to be spent that way. It may not be any kind of a compliance issue, but it'd be something that we report to the public. And then the public would probably give us feedback and say, hey, look, we don't want the money spent that way. We don't want our donations, fundraising money spent that way.
I guess
That-
the
that would
unknown
be
is worse than anything, you know, just the fact that we don't know, you know, or the public doesn't know. Anyway, any
Well, I
other,
believe the public should know.
yeah. Any other comments on this item from the table?
I think we need to move forward. If we can get the volunteer to open up their books, we'll do what we need to do to get that.
Right.
done.
Is that, Ms. Newman, are we talking about the public funds, or are we talking about all of the fire departments?
Especially the public funds.
What, okay,
Is, why do we give one volunteer fire department a grant and not the others? And
Correct.
who's that money being spent on?
right.
So their books ought to be open to the public, and they should not resist. So that, like Mr. Russo said, why they resist in that. So I'd like to see why they're resisting.
Right, let me make sure we have this straight. Okay, the fire department that has the public funding, I believe it's, what, 50,000 a year. We definitely will audit that fire department, so long as I can get the fire chief and his financial person to come by my office, so we can talk about the financial records that I need to do the audit. At this point in time, I don't have that. Now, the other 6 fire departments, are we saying that we're just going to put those aside? We don't want to do any of that? We don't want to do an ordinance on that? Or
Well,
how do you want me to go about that?
I think it deserves some further thought and discussion for the future.
Right,
I'm not sure what we will do at this point. We
okay,
do know we're moving forward on the Point LaHash,
good.
the one that does have the funding, and I
Yes.
guess we can have some conversation about how far we want to go. And I guess some of our colleagues would have to be involved in that discussion as well. If you say we have to have a council ordinance,
That's what Mr. Cryer said. He
Not a-
said
not a-
that would be the fastest way or the cleanest way to do it, rather than going through a subpoena process.
the only risk that I see is that the volunteers get upset and don't show up for fires.
That's a big risk.
On the other hand, I would expect them to not have a problem with being transparent either. So, you know, it's kind of a two-edged sword for me.
Yeah,
You know, I'm all interested in transparency, and when someone says they can't look at it, it makes me suspicious of why I can't look at it.
I agree. Totally
Anyway.
agree with that.
Because it's not public funds coming from us, but it still is the public's money.
Exactly. It's still donations and fundraising is still public funds. Even the member dues, I would think, would be public funds.
Yeah, under the cover of the public entity that they
Yeah.
are, unless they consider to be private, which most people think they're a public fire department. But anyway,
Right.
we can talk about this for quite a while, and we won't resolve it today, I'm sure.
Right. Okay. So we'll just go forward with the Point LaHash Fire Department. Okay.
Any further items, or discussion on this item? Hearing none, we'll move to item 3.
3A, status of the PPG contracts internal audit.
Okay, I have sent a draft report to the Audit Committee and Management on October 7th. Management has until November 8th to respond to the audit observations. I will send a final report to the committee and management on November 9th.
Are you getting the information that you need to complete this audit from the responses, or you haven't?
That audit has been completed. I've sent out a draft report.
No, but I'm talking about the responses, so you can,
I have not received any responses as yet. Normally, they wait until, a good while before they give out their responses. In the past, it's interesting, and I don't want to, belabor this, but in the past, when I normally send out an audit report, I would get some feedback such as, "Hey, Randy, you're full of baloney," or "Randy, I'm coming to your office to talk about this stuff," or whatever. But I don't know. I just don't get a whole lot of feedback until towards the end, and I have to send out another email to folks. But that's okay. If that's the way everything works, I can work within that framework.
But you do have a deadline for them to put responses, and if no responses are received, then the
No, that's
audit will
right.
stand as it is.
Yep. And November 9th, come rain or shine, the report goes out.
Okay. Any other comments or discussion on the draft? I guess we'll wait and see what the responses are and how we'll deal with them.
Right.
And we'll revisit this at our next meeting.
That's, well, I guess that's up for discussion as well, what we're going to do in November and December, but the next meeting, maybe in January or whenever we meet again, right?
Personally, I would recommend that we suspend the meetings in November and December and come back in January when we can really have final audits in place.
Yeah, I agree.
And you would, well, let's finish the agenda and then we'll
Okay.
discuss that. Next item,
3B, status of the volunteer fire department's internal audit.
I think we're pretty well exhausted.
Yeah, well, I think we've spoken about that.
So then, item C.
Status of the audit plan and risk assessment.
Okay, I'm currently gathering the data for this. I plan on sending a risk assessment report and a list of audit priorities to the committee and management during January. The data is coming in. I'm getting cooperation now from management. So we're just going to move forward with it. This type of report takes a lot of time, and even though once I get all the information in that I need from management, I still have to sit down and analyze it before I put in my column, which is my judgment. And I have to look at the data and see whether it makes sense to me or not. And if it doesn't make sense, then I need to get back to management and ask them to maybe send me some information, additional information on it. So that being said, normally this type of risk assessment, if it can take up to 4 or 5 months. I've been in situations where we've asked management to give us copies of transactions as well as, what they think about the particular auditable activity. So that being said, I think we're moving along okay, fairly well, but it's still going to take, up through the beginning of January to complete it and get a report to the committee and to management. Now, as I said before, what I'm going to ask everybody to do is I'm going to ask Mr. Lapine to sign off on it as parish president. Once he reviews it, if he has any problems with anything that I've selected, then we can discuss it. Either I'll disagree or he'll disagree, and we'll just agree to disagree, or we'll change it. Then it'll come to the audit committee for their approval, and we'll go through it again, and we'll hash it out again. The committee and I'll hash that out until we have a final product. And that'll be the listing of the audit priorities or audits that we plan on doing for 2020. And maybe even a few of them that if we don't get finished beyond 2020, 2021.
So you're saying that you're going to work on your risk assessment before you even get to the next order here of property and lease buildings and rentals?
No, what I think I'm going to do, Ms. Newberry, is I'm going to try to finish the Point Ala Hash audit, and then depending on the time that I have in between Point Ala Hash and the risk assessment, I'm going to try to fit in at least the start of the lease audit.
So the rest of the year give you some time to complete everything, the next 2 months?
I'm hoping to, I'm not saying I'm going to complete everything within this year. In fact, it probably be completed next year, more than likely.
I'm talking about the volunteer and your risk assessment.
Yeah.
Getting the rest of your report for the contract.
What I plan on doing is working as hard as I can to get these reports to you in a reasonable time frame. What happens with these reports? Normally, it takes me 2 or 3 months to do the report from the point where I'm gathering the data. Now, we don't know when management is going to, just like the point a la hash, we don't know when they're going to give me the data for that. But from the point I get the data, these reports take between 2 or 3 months. Then after the draft is completed and sent to management, I give management another month to do their comments. So we're talking about 3 to 4 months sometimes before a report like this gets out and finalized. Now, the risk assessment is a doozy of an operation, of a report, and I'm going to try to work on that as well as the volunteer fire department and get that to the committee as soon as possible.
Okay. But the intention is to get buy-in from management so that when we ask for the documents on the risk assessment, the particular audit, they will cooperate because they'll know up front that this is one of the audits that we're going to have.
Yes, that's correct. And I don't want a situation next year to where we have disagreements with management. If we decide we're going to add an audit, say some sort of big problem child comes up next year that we have to audit, I believe we're going to have to get management involved as well as a committee to decide whether or not to put it on the audit schedule. And that's what I'm leaning towards. That's really the way this should be working all along. We should have cooperation and agreement between management and the committee as to what we're going to audit during the year.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the table? None? All right. Let's move to item number 4.
Discussion regarding the November and December Audit Committee meetings.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, the November, December meetings, I would recommend that we suspend them until January, till when you will have, obviously you should have the contracts audit complete with management comments returned, a final audit issued, perhaps even some of the fire department audit complete, and we can catch up on the risk assessment to see if that's complete as well. Is there any objection for us to suspend those 2 meetings?
No objection.
Okay.
I think, though, once we get the
risk
assessment in from Mr. Lapine, President Lapine, it's going to take all of us a while to decide, about the audits in question. And it's going to maybe take 1 or 2 meetings to really finalize what we want to do for next year. That's just my gut feeling.
Well, I would like to have a clear picture in January as to what the rest of the year will be.
Yes.
So we do not lose any time.
I would too.
So hopefully we'll wrap up this year's audits in January, and also in January set the schedule and agenda for the rest of the year.
That's what I'm hoping for.
All right. Any further comments on this item? None? Have next, item 5.
Approval of the minutes from the September 12, 2019 meeting.
Go ahead. Mr. Konovich offers.
Second.
Ms. Newberry seconds. Any comments or discussion on the item, adoption of the minutes of September 12, 2019? Hearing none, machine is open. And the minutes are adopted 3-0. Any further business to come before the audit committee today? Hearing none, here entertain a motion to adjourn. Offered by Mr. Konovich, second by Ms. Newberry. Machine is open. And the meeting is adjourned at, what time is it? I don't see my clock. What time? 9:54. Thank you all for coming.